All right, so now this part is going to be the part that's going to require the most review. Stick with me on this. Follow along with how I break down the logic of this. So what we're going to do is we are going to be looking at different movements. And as we look at different movements, we're going to figure out which is the agonist and what muscle action it provides. So the first exercise is the curl up. The first thing you need to analyze is what is the work phase. So the work phase of a curl up is as you crunch up, as your spine flexes. Okay, that's the work phase. So the up phase is the work phase in an abdominal curl up. So please, even use a piece of paper. Hide the down phase column. Okay, we don't need to think about that right now. Okay, so during an abdominal curl up, as we do the up phase, as we crunch up, what joint has the movement? So as you do a curl up, the joint movement, or the joint that the movement comes from, are our vertebra, our spine. So the next question you need to ask yourself to analyze a curl up is, what is that movement? What is that joint action? And the answer is, during the up work phase, it's spinal flexion. Spinal flexion. Next thing, are you working with or against the gravity? Because it's the up phase, you're working against gravity. Gravity's pulling you down, you're working against gravity to come up. So what type of muscle action will pull you up? Well, the rectus abdominis needs to shorten. It needs to shorten. So it's going to be a concentric muscle action to pull you up. And the muscle that will do that is the rectus abdominis. Now, the reason I'm focusing on the up phase is this is where the work happens. This is what's going to let you determine what is the prime mover. Because the down phase is only going to be the same prime mover that is just going to be doing an eccentric, a lengthening muscle action. So down phase, the joint stays the same, okay, because it's still going to be the spine that works. I want you not to think about the joint action, because I promise you, if you think about the joint action, it's going to confuse you. Because in reality, is that the up phase in this case is going to be spinal flexion. The down phase is actually, in reality, the slow release of spinal flexion. Okay? You are not doing spinal extension as a work phase on an ab curl. If you were to crunch up, okay, that's your work phase. If you were to go down, all you are doing is slowly releasing the movement of spinal flexion. If you did spinal extension, you would slam your shoulders into the ground. Picture that. And maybe pause the thing and try that. Do a curl up and then try to do spinal extension to come down. That's not what we do. What we do during the down phase is we use the same prime mover, which is the rectus abdominis, and we slowly release down. We move in the same direction as the resistance. So really the movement is technically the slow release of flexion. That's really what it is. So that's why we leave this blank. Because it's a down phase, we're moving with gravity or in the direction of the resistance. So our muscle action is eccentric. The rectus abdominis is slowly lowering under tension. It's slowly lengthening under tension. So the muscle used is still the rectus abdominis. The confusion people make, they figure out the up phase fine, but then they make the mistake of saying that the down phase is the opposite movement. So they would say extension in this case. And then they get confused because they'd go all of a sudden, well, the muscle used is going to be the erector spinae. No. No, 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 no. That's not what's happening. It is still, and I, once again, try it. Please try it. Do an ab curl up nice and slow, and then as slow as you possibly can, as slow as you can, lower back down. And you are going to feel your abdominals shake. You'll know it's the rectus abdominis that's really doing the work. So this is that lowering of that the pail of water down, or bucket of water. If I asked you about an isometric, If I do an isometric ab curl, well, guess what? It is still the same muscle. It's still the rectus abdominis with a isometric muscle action. So let's carry on to the next exercise. So now we're going to move into push-ups. So they are all in the up phase. So once again, please actually cover up for right now the down phase until I start to talk about it, okay? So on a push-up, what is the work phase? Where do you work? And the work phase is always against gravity. So in the push-up, it's the up phase. Now, two major joints are going to be working during a push-up, the elbow joint and the shoulder joint. We have to assess these individual. So they've said here, the push-up, what happens at the elbow. So during the up phase, what's the joint? Well, they told us what we're looking at. It's the elbow. If you imagine those individuals, they have just finished the up phase. They did the push-up part. Okay, they just finished the up phase. Okay, so imagine they all start on the bottom. Okay, so they've got their chest on the ground and they're about to do the up phase. What happens at the elbow? And the answer is the elbow will start at a flex position and it will extend. Elbow extension is the joint action during the up phase of a push-up. What muscle does elbow extension? And you can refer back to your list, but it's the triceps. Triceps do elbow extension. And now if it's the up phase, they're working against gravity. How do the triceps contract to do elbow extension? They shorten. So it's a concentric action. Once again, at the elbow, the up phase is as you push yourself off the ground. At the elbow, the movement is going to be extension. The muscle that does extension is the triceps brachii. It works against gravity, so the muscle is shortening and it pushes you up. So it's a concentric muscle action. So now we know that. Let's go to the down phase. So now they're in this position here. So they're at the top position. So looking at your picture, they would be slowly lowering themselves down. So the joint is still the elbow because that's what we told you you're looking at. The movement is really, you can either leave that blank or you think of it as the slow release of extension. Okay? They are not flexing. They're not doing a flexion action because if they forcefully flex their elbow, they will do a painful face plant into the ground. They would be throwing themselves at the ground if they were forcefully contracting into elbow flexion. That's not what they're doing. What they're doing is they're slowly releasing elbow extension. So they are going along in the same direction as gravity. It's always the same muscle. Okay, so the triceps will slowly release elbow extension, okay, in an eccentric muscle action. Okay, little hints for you guys. The joint will always stay the same. Don't ever think about what the movement is during the down phase. Only analyze the up phase. The up or work phase is always going to be a concentric action. The down phase is always going to be the releasing of the muscle slowly, which is eccentric action. And the muscle used will always be the same. So all I'm trying to stress to you guys is if you could figure out the up phase, everything stays the same on the down phase except the muscle action changes. It's a lowering, a release of the weight. So now, push-up, we're looking at the shoulder. Once again, cover the down phase for a second. So the work phase, they were on the ground with their arms bent, okay? And they are doing a push-up. So right now in this picture, they have just finished their up phase. So we're looking at the shoulder. To push up, they're actually at the shoulder alone. This confuses people a little bit. They're doing horizontal adduction. Yes, I know most people will do a push-up with their arm slightly between horizontal adduction and shoulder flexion. Okay, they're in between the two. I know this, okay? Don't worry about that detail. Just accept that horizontal adduction. Just use horizontal adduction. If they are pushing themselves up away from the floor, they're working against gravity. The muscle that will cause horizontal adduction against resistance is going to be your pectoralis major and your anterior deltoid. Pectoralis major and anterior deltoid. If you are working against gravity, those muscles are going to be shortening. They're going to be contracting to pull the humerus across the body, so they will have a concentric muscle action. Okay, so once again, up phase at the shoulder is horizontal adduction. It's against gravity. It's the pectoralis major as well as the anterior deltoid, and the muscle action is a concentric shortening muscle action against gravity. And then the down phase. Everything stays the same, except now you're going with gravity, you're lowering down, and the muscle action is eccentric. So the joint is still the shoulder because we've determined that. The movement is technically slowly releasing under control, horizontal adduction. That's what's really happening there. So you're moving with gravity. The same muscle is going to be in charge, so it's the pectoralis major and the anterior deltoid, and the action is eccentric. They're slowly lengthening. They're controlling your descent. If these individuals did not do an eccentric contraction of pec major and your anterior deltoid, they would do a face plant when they hit the ground. Instead, they are slowing down the effect of gravity. They're breaking the pull of gravity, slowing it down as they lower themselves. All right. This concept, honestly, if you could get this concept, you are set and fine. So let's talk about the squat now. The squat has two major joint actions that we're going to think about, the hip and the knee. It's important that you look at them separately. Do not confuse the two of them. You look at them separately. So really, if I was to deal with a question about this, I would go, okay, what acts on what joint? So I'd figure out what joint we're doing. I'd figure out what action happens at the joint and what muscles would cause a concentric movement. So once again, cover the down phase. Squat, right now they're holding isometric, but what they would do during the up phase, they would straighten their legs and stand up. So if you are seated in a chair right now, if you were to stand up, you are doing the work phase of a squat. So I encourage you, if you're sitting in a chair, just stand up for a second. That's the work phase, and then as you lower yourself back down into the chair, it's the lowering phase. Okay? If you stand up out of the chair, you're working against gravity. You're doing the up phase. As you lower back into the chair, you're going with gravity. So the joint that we're going to look at first is the hip joint. What is the hip joint movement? And so if you look at just what happens at the hip joint to come up out of a squat to do the work phase of the squat, the standing up portion, hip extension occurs. Hip extension. What muscles did we discuss that caused hip extension? And the answer is your gluteus maximus and your hamstrings. Both of those muscles cause hip extension. So that's why when we do squats, when they're coming up, we tell people squeeze their glutes, squeeze their butts, drive their hips forward. That is because it's hip extension during the work phase. The gluteus maximus and the hamstrings are contracting concentrically. They are shortening. They are shortening, which is going to drive the hips forward. Okay? So now you could clear your paper out of the way and look at the down phase. It's also the hip, but now you're lowering down. They were standing up and they're lowering down into the squat, or in your case, you could be lowering down into your chair. Their movement is with gravity. So what they are doing is they're slowly releasing extension. So it's the same muscles acting on the hip. It's the gluteus maximus and the hamstrings. And they are doing an eccentric muscle action. Once again, if these muscles did not slow down the movement and slowly release the hip extension, if they didn't do that with control, the person would fall and land on their butt. This gets confusing, especially in the lower extremity, because people get confused because the hamstrings also cross the knee. But in the squat, the hamstrings work on the hip. The other point of confusion is everybody will say to me, but Kimberly, I feel it in my quadriceps. Yes, you do, but you don't feel it in your quadriceps because of the hip joint. You feel it because of the knee joint, which we're going to look at next. At the knee. During the up phase, as these individuals stand up from where they are, the movement is going to be knee extension. The knee was bent, and now it's straightening up. The muscle that will cause knee extension is the quadriceps acting concentrically. A shortening of the quadriceps will cause knee extension. So during the down phase, the movement's still at the knee. They're slowly releasing knee extension. They are moving with gravity. They're lowering down. So the muscle is still the quadriceps. And the action is an eccentric lowering action. You need to have this completely solidified in your brain. This needs to make sense to you. Always picture the work phase. Figure out which muscles act on that joint and how they would shorten. And then the opposite direction for the lowering. Now, the other way to look at it too is if I asked you isometrically, without movement, what muscles are contracting at the knee joint in a squat, isometrically, it's a quadriceps. Always the same muscle at the joint. Okay, isometrically, what muscles are contracting at the hip joint in the squat? So if you hold that squat, so if you just stand there like these individuals are, doing a stationary movement, then the answer is going to be at the hip, the gluteus maximus and hamstring contract, or doing an isometric muscle action. Okay, so a lunge, all I'll tell you about a lunge is nothing but a one-legged squat. Okay, I know things still happen in the back leg. I know we need to still stabilize, but really, it's all it's just that front leg that counts, right? Because really, you could lift your back leg up and put it on something, right? It's a front leg that does the work. So if you could picture these two photos of her backwards, she starts out when she's on the Bosu. You can see that she's starting out with her knee flexed and her hip flexed. So to get her from the right picture to the left picture, she has to extend the hip and extend the knee. If she's extending the hip, the muscles that will extend the hip are the gluteus maximus and the hamstrings with the concentric muscle action against gravity. That's how she'd push herself up out of the squat. That's the work phase. As she moves from the picture on the left to the picture on the right, so lowers into the squat, it's still at the hip. The action's still at the hip. It's the gluteus maximus and the hamstrings doing an eccentric muscle action. Excellent. Please review that carefully. Usually what I will do is I actually always, anytime I'm asked to analyze a movement, I would simply write out a nice little cheat sheet for me. So when you do the exam, don't cheat on the exam, but rather on the side of your exam, write it out. If they ask you about what muscles act somewhere with the squat, I would say what muscles work at the hip as you stand up out of a chair. Let's say that's a question, right? So I would go hip. I would say that's the up phase. That's the work phase. So I know the muscles are shortening. The joint action is going to be hip extension. What muscles do hip extension? The gluteus maximus and the hamstring. If they were to ask me what muscles, they would be doing a concentric muscle action. The question would say, well, what muscles are going to contract or work as you lower yourself into a chair? I would think, okay, that's a down phase of a squat. I would write out the answers for the work phase, and the only thing I would change is it's the same muscles, but now it's eccentric. And then pay attention to what joint, because then all of a sudden if it was a knee, I would say as you stood out of the chair, it's a knee causing knee, or the quadriceps causing knee extension to stand up as they do a concentric muscle action. As you lower down, it's going to be also the quadriceps at the knee doing an eccentric muscle action. So just some general other concepts when it comes to movement mechanics that we need to be aware of. Balance and stability. So we can adjust things in our balance, in our body, to change our balance and our stability. So if we stand with a wider stance in this picture, a wider stance is going to give us a larger base of support, so improve our balance. The narrower stance is going to put us at a smaller base of support and challenge our balance. So we need to realize that when people that don't have good stability, especially older adults, that they are at a higher risk of falls. If they fall, they can really, really injure themselves. And in fact, their mortality rates in a year, the chances of them dying within a year as a senior citizen, if you fall and break something, are very, very high. So we want to manipulate the 5 factors that affect stability. And if we can manipulate these factors, we can challenge or make more easy stability and balance. So the first factor is going to be our base of support. So in that last picture you saw that this is the region bound by the body parts in contact with the supporting surface. So how wide is your base of support? The wider of a stance you have, the more stable you will be. So picture a sporting position. If you told an athlete to get in a ready position, they're going to stand with a wide stance. Okay? Narrower stance is less stable. A single leg is even less stable. The other thing will be your center of mass. So the center of mass is a point in the body where your weight and mass is centered. Okay? So it's your balance point. And in anatomical position, it's roughly around the level of the pelvis. The closer your center of mass is to the ground, the more stable you will be. So if you're sitting on the ground, you're way more stable than if you're standing up. If you are standing on tiptoes, okay, you are also going to be more unstable, right? For 2 reasons. First of all, your base of support got smaller because you're now on your tiptoes as opposed to your full feet. But also your center of mass moved even farther away. So taller individuals have a balance disadvantage. You know, their center of mass is further away from the ground. But we could adapt this. So remember, go back to my athlete example. I didn't finish that off. I said that if an athlete needs to be in a ready position to do something, what do? They take a wider stance and they usually bend their knees a bit. They are lowering that center of mass closer to the ground. They're making themselves more stable. The next factor is going to be the line of gravity. So line of gravity is an imaginary vertical line that passes through our central mass and the ground. If that line of gravity is centered over top of our base of support, we will be more stable. So if my pelvis is over top of both of my feet, I am more stable. If I move my line of gravity outside of my base of support, it will make me less stable. So imagine shifting your weight far to a side. It'd be very easy for someone to come and push you over. You would not be very stable. The next thing that will affect our balance is our friction. Okay? So the more friction we have, the more stable we would actually be. So the example is ice versus walking on carpet. So if you're on a very frictionless surface, there's still friction with ice, but comparison to carpet, it'd be much less friction. You are going to be less stable. And the final one is inertia. So that is a concept that an object at rest tends to stay at rest, and an object in motion stays to stay in motion. So what that would mean is that as I am in motion, I'd be stable. As I try to stop, then that's going to give me a moment of being unstable, right? So you could picture somebody that's moving sideways and kind of at that end point, they're the least stable because they're really having to take that line of gravity and bring it back over their center of mass. So how can we play around with this? Base of support, if I want to make you more stable, I would have you take a wider stance. If I want to challenge your balance more, I'd have you take a narrower stance. Probably in an exercise class, I wouldn't have you on tiptoes. That would seem a little silly. But I could have you on a single leg. I could challenge you more. My center of mass would be to bend my knees, right? So the lower down my center of mass, the more stable, versus standing more tall, or even arguably if I extend my arms overhead, it also increase my center of mass, or coming on my tiptoes in that case. Line of gravity Um, we want to make sure that it's lined up. So we wouldn't have somebody off their line of gravity. So we would not have it so that they're leaning forward. We'd like to keep that line of gravity centered over their feet. Ways that you could challenge it by doing exercises that try to take us out of that line, our natural alignment, so it makes us correct to get you back into alignment. That could be also a challenge. Friction. They have a great idea here. It's a Smith machine. So Smith machine is a barbell that rides up and down a very kind of has, how to describe this? A Smith machine is a barbell that kind of goes up and down on these little riders on either side, so that you're working against a surface which would have more friction to it. So that would also increase your stability because you'd have more friction. And also simply choosing a more stable surface in general so that you're not on something sliding. The challenge is that using a freely movable dumbbell or barbell. So if I don't have it stuck in that Smith machine, I don't have as much friction. Okay. Inertia would be, to assist it would be to do things slowly and controlled, whereas if I do things more quickly or do more abrupt changes in direction, that will challenge me more using inertia. So then it's important to notice that the human body is a lever system. So the way that muscles will pull on bones is a lever system. You'll learn a lot more about this if you take the resistance training thing. But in reality, the long bones of our body are going to act as rigid levers that the muscles will pull on. Okay? The joint is going to be the axis of rotation or the fulcrum on which the lever pivots. And the muscles will apply a force which will produce an effort. Okay, so that's how the body will work. So when I do a bicep curl, my forearm is going to be the lever, my fulcrum is going to be my elbow, and my muscles are going to give an effort force, whereas the weight in my hand will give a resistive force. That is how the lever system works. Here is worth pointing out that they're doing push-ups 3 different ways to the left. And if you measure the line from the contact on the floor to where their hands are, you can see the first lady has a very short lever. This would be an easier exercise. The reason it gets a little harder when she does a plank position, the middle lady now, to the knees, is now that lever is longer. It's going to be harder. And the hardest lever would then be the push-up, because that gentleman's foot, that's the fulcrum of rotation, whereas his arms are very, very far away from the fulcrum, which makes them work a lot harder. So here's just another visual of a lever. So the force is generated by an external source, such as gravity, inertia, or friction, and then the body that resists the motion is called the load. Okay, so you have a fulcrum, an effort arm, and a resistance arm. This class of lever that we see right here is not actually the most common ones. Okay. So 4 factors that can change the force of an exercise. The amount of resistive force, so resisting the movement, can be decreased as a result of weight loss. So if the individual loses weight, we can, the resistive force, if they're doing a body weight exercise, will be decreased. Understanding, though, you can also artificially increase the resistive force by adding weight. The movement force applied by the muscle during a contraction can be adjusted, so you could do a slower, more controlled movement to make it more difficult. The length of a lever can be changed. So look at the push-up example. You could go from your knees and make it more difficult and go to your toes, a longer lever. And then the angle of pull. So the angle of pull is the angle between the muscle insertion and the bone on which it inserts. So the amount of muscular force or tension that's needed to cause joint movement is affected by the angle of pull. That's why when we do a bicep curl, we're weakest at the beginning and end of the exercise, because the angle on which that muscle has to pull on the bone, it puts us at a mechanical disadvantage. So excellent. This was also a very challenging chapter. You did very, very well. Just keep reviewing how I taught you to look at movement mechanics and go over and over and over the examples until it really starts to make sense. So listing the agonists, the antagonists, the synergists, and stabilizers for the abdominal curl. The agonist, the one that does the work, is going to be your rectus abdominis. Both in the up phase of the ab curl, it will be doing a concentric action. And in the lower in phase, it's also the agonist working. It's also the rectus abdominis doing eccentric action. The antagonist is the opposite muscle. So on this case, that would be your erector spinae. Synergist would probably be your oblique. So your external internal oblique will assist. And stabilizers, the psoas will serve as a stabilizer during that. I guess arguably you could say stabilizers a little bit in the scapula, so you're not just pulling your arms forward. Using the squat as an example, describe 4 factors that can change the force of this exercise. So one factor can be the amount of resistive force. So you could add weight to your body. Okay? You could change the speed in which you do your squat. So you could do a very, very slow squat. You could do a faster squat. You could lengthen the lever. So if you want to make the glutes and hamstrings work harder, if you had your arms stretched out in front of you, would lengthen the lever of the upper body. And then the angle of pull, that one would really sort of depend. Arguably, to change the angle of pull, you'd have to start dipping below 90 degrees, but as we'll discuss later, that's going to be harder on other joints. And using the 5 factors that affect stability and balance, how can I modify the lunge exercise? So the 5 factors is your base of support, your center of mass, your line of gravity, friction, and inertia. So if my base of support, I can, maybe it's just my base of support. My base of support with the lunge exercise, I guess I could change what I'm resting on. So I could put my base of support on an unsteady surface to make it harder. My center of mass, I'm going to make my center of mass more challenging. I guess I could raise myself up higher off the ground. I could do it off a bench instead to play around my center of mass. My line of gravity, if I wanted to challenge that, I'd probably put a dumbbell in one hand and not the other. So the dumbbell would be trying to pull my line of gravity off to the side, and I'd have to correct it by keeping it more centered. Friction, I can make it harder by putting my back foot on a glider or on a freely movable surface. So like some of those gliders like that you would do the skating motion on, I would use that. And then inertia, I could try to go very slow or very fast, change around that speed and momentum. Excellent.